Well, welcome everyone. I'm Harold Buchanan, chairman of SD Hist. Tonight we're gathering a few friends of SD Hist to talk about one of the greatest topics in gaming, the American Revolution. Through our upcoming online AmRev250 on June 27th, which you should register for if you haven't, as we approach the 250th anniversary of the American independence, we are celebrating not only the history itself, but also games that have helped us explore that history. Joining me tonight are Alexander and Grant from the Player's Aid, whose reviews and interviews have introduced numerous games to new experience, the gamers to new experience, and of course the legendary designer Volko Ruhnke, whose work has changed the way many of us think about historical game design. Tonight's a conversation amongst gamers about our favorite American Revolution games, what makes them memorable, and why this period continues to inspire designers and players alike. So let's talk about the Revolution. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello from the Commonwealth of Virginia, land of presidents.
Is that what that is?
Yeah. I think we claimed several early ones. You know, again, like we were talking about before, everybody has their glory days, right?
That's true.
Speaking of glory days,
like, Revolution and shortly thereafter, I guess.
So let's start off talking a little bit about new gamers. And the question I want to ask you three, and again, I'm just going to feed us some questions. And if you guys have no energy or stamina, then I'll keep feeding you questions. Otherwise,
Harold.
Otherwise, I'm gonna feed you questions. So, so say somebody walks into the hobby knowing nothing about the American Revolution, but they're interested in learning through games. What's the single best game to teach both the history and the hobby that we all love?
I don't know. I think at
that's
that level,
hard-hitting question right out the gate.
I might think of 1775. Academy games, and just because it's built to be so easy to pick up what's going on. So, I think it would, for somebody who wasn't too familiar with the usual forms like hex and counter that we know, I think it would feel comfortable.
Yeah, I like that as a pick because it gives you the whole broad scope of the war. But I'm also a person where I'd like to pair that with something that gives you the feel of the tactical battling, the kinds of conflicts like the fighting that was done. And so I would pair that with Commands and Colors Tricorn. Commands and Colors, a nice easy system for people. Here's my guys. I roll some dice, play a few cards. Those are very familiar mechanics, nothing overwhelming. But you start to get here's my line of battle, and I'm moving guys, and I've got different types of guys. You really learn a lot about that side of wargaming as well. And you get the two different scopes, and you get a lot of AmRev between those two games, I think, for a new player.
Yeah.
Well, I expected somebody to mention Liberty or Death already, but I would jump into the deep end of the pool and play one of the greatest volumes in the coin series ever made, Liberty or Death. In one of the comments I'll
be right back.
Initially I was very attracted to Liberty or Death in the coin series because it looked so pretty on the table.
Yeah.
The cubes,
map artist, yeah.
I had people that.
Grant, you just digitized on us when I pulled out my own Liberty or Death.
Which is tough. But Liberty or Death, on the coin scale, it's a little bit on the more complex side. But that doesn't mean that you can't start with it. I think that was our very first coin game that we played. We dove right in, and that's kind of part of why he's bringing that up. Huh. But like you said, there's a wow factor when you see it on the table. It is beautiful. And when you walk past the table and someone's got that set up, it looks like a historical map. It's got these wonderful pieces on it. Yeah. And you can't help but stop. And it draws you right into it. That was one of the very first games that I know that we put on social media, and people were just like going crazy over it.
And is that connected? Or in other words, was the reason you went to that one first within the coin series was because, hey, look at this, cool looking map? Or was it, the topic, like, okay, the American Revolution, being something exciting to you, or how did you come to that first? Some other
I think it was a confluence of all of those things. Grant loves the American Revolution. That game was new at the time. It was like I think you got that on P500 or had just bought it after it came out, maybe.
Yeah.
And it also looked amazing. Like, it looks pretty.
Interesting. Yeah. So I like it too. In fact, interestingly, it's one of the coin games that it's among the few that I have played the most after being published. And one of the reasons was that my younger son, Andrew, and I, so the co-designer with me of Falling Sky, we had a holiday tradition for a while. We actually played it 2-player. Like, we liked it 2v2 the best, and like managing the team of each on a side, and like how do you do that? Of course, I lost every time, but it was still interesting.
So that's also a great draw to it. It does work that way.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think originally my idea was that the victory conditions would be 2v2, and that's it. But we decided that individuals wanted a chance. A funny story: I was driving to LA to meet Mark Herman at a game store to play something with him. And I get this call, and it pops up, and it's Volko on my cell. So I answer, "Hey, Volko, how you doing?" He said, "Harold, we have a rules question." And at that point, I said, "Man, I'm in big trouble, because if these guys have a rules question about a coin game, and Andrew is as expert at coin as Volko is, I've got a hole in the game, right?" And so they laid out the most obscure situation with the most obscure map set up that would never, ever be possible in real life. And then they say, so what do we do? Well, it's not covered in the rule. And I'm not going to say what it is, because as soon as I say it, everybody in BGG is going to say they experienced it. But I told them, and I said, but at the same time, here, that's a good interpretation, but I think this interpretation is more fair. And I laid one out. By the way, the one I laid out was more favorable to Andrew, Volko's son. And Volko said, "No, we're going to use the other." And I said, "Well, actually, mine's a little more fair." And he says, "No, house rules my house." And it's good to hear that he lost that game as well.
Yeah, I need any edge on my son for sure. Yeah, we were probably arguing about it as the reason we called you.
Yes. No, I as much as I'd like to continue talking about Liberty or Death and the designer, the other thing that was interesting, the other game that would be interesting to me would be the Saratoga Mark Miklos game. There's something about tactical for a first-time gamer, especially a young person. There's something about tactical and being able to visualize the cannons and the people and the horses and the cavalry that just make that a powerful experience. And Volko and I have talked about this a lot, but the reason that we first started playing games was because of tanks and airplanes, right? It wasn't, it wasn't armies and divisions.
Yeah. And another aspect is, if you have this opportunity with a lot, you can actually see the place, right? You can go to Saratoga and walk the battlefield and see the trees and everything. And then you see the map. The Saratoga map is also, to me, very beautiful. And it's like in the season, it's like early autumn in New York and so forth. And so I had done that. I had gone to Saratoga, and so I loved the game. And so now, do I get to show off now, Harold?
I'm sure you're going to show off at some point during the nice. Very nice.
Oh, look at that one.
Yeah.
So nice. I'm not a big 2
years in a row.
I'm not a big tournament guy, but I love this tournament at WBC, and I ended up. This was like cited as my main achievement on BGG. Like, if you looked me up on BGG, it would tell you that I had played and won at Saratoga. And I think that is still true, actually. So
for the record, Volko, that looked like it. Did they give an award for third place? Is that it? Did you have that made yourself?
No. These were. Do they not do this anymore at WBC? This is
third place.
This is real. This is history, man.
Okay.
Look at that.
What were the years of those two?
This is 2000.
Yes.
And this is 2001. So
Right.
this was
Very
about
good.
in the Wilderness War era.
Yeah, I think I was in high school. But well, congratulations, and I'm glad you're still carrying those.
Thank you.
Carrying those around with you.
Long time coming, getting that congratulations from you, Harold. I do appreciate that.
Yes. Well, no representations. No representations.
Yeah.
Well, it is, and it's a great game. And I one of the things that about the coin series and Liberty or Death is that it crosses that line. It may not be tactical, but those little cubes somehow move us a little bit closer to operational tactical, right? I mean, they're so tactile, and the colors are brilliant. I mean, GMT did a great job printing it. It's just that brings back some of that. And who hasn't had a battle there where you've kind of fashioned the cubes into line and right?
Oh yeah,
and labeled the generals and all of that sort of thing.
So it's funny. I just now thought of this, but when you said about with tanks and airplanes and stuff, and of course I had the World War II guys, and I had the little tan-colored British troops that were always fighting in shorts. I mean, they were landing on Normandy beach, but they're in shorts. Those little soldiers, And but actually before that, I had a set that was American Revolution with cannons and horsemen and infantry, and it was like a red and plastic and blue plastic. And the red plastic guys had little pointy hats like Hessian grenadiers, I guess. And and I lined those guys up and positioned the cannons and shut them all down and everything. Yeah, I think I did AmRev toys before World War II even. Now I think about it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know where to get them.
Do you still have those, Volko?
No. Long gone, unfortunately.
He's got the trophies, though. He's got those 2 trophies.
Oh, I'm not giving up my wood, no.
Wouldn't ask you to give up your wood, Volko.
Thank you.
With all due respect.
I keep them close.
What's hard to design? In Volko, you've done Wilderness War, right? So really same period, different conflict, different nature of that conflict. But what is it that's hard about the British or the Patriots that make these games interesting? From a design
point of view?
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny since you mentioned Wilderness War, which is a CDG and bounces very closely off of Hannibal, Rome versus Carthage, which bounces very closely off We the People. And so, so the American Revolution started the CDG line as we know it, right?
Yes.
And what was special about it for war gamers? I think it was this is a political struggle, right? This isn't, we take the cap, like, the British take Philadelphia and you win, right? That what Mark Herman brought into it was, we're going to have political control of areas, and the army maneuver is going to be directly for the purpose of political control, which can change by other means, meaning political means. And so we need to bring those political events directly into gameplay.
Yeah.
And the event cards mixed in with military operations was a solution for that, for how do we represent a revolutionary war as opposed to just a state military conflict. I think so. So I think it's the kind of war that leads you to design solutions that spawn that revolution in board wargaming, I think.
I'm not a designer by any means, but I have always found it interesting the way that recruitment and generating additional troops in most of the games that we have played on the AmRev are all similar, but they have their own unique elements. I've just always found that interesting. Even games like Revolution Road from Compass Games has some really interesting ways that you recruit Patriot soldiers along the way. And I think everybody has done a really great job of that kind of element because they came out of the woodwork, right? They showed up from the fields and the hunting lodges with their rifles and decided, hey, we're going to take some pot shots at these, British soldiers and tell them to get the hell out of the colonies. So always interesting. That recruitment, I think, is pretty fascinating.
Well, and building on that, the disbanding cycle. The Patriots will always have some kind of, we get them, we fight for a season, but they got to go home. And it's dealing with that cycle as opposed to the British troops, who it's invariably, here's my big army, I got to march out as best I can. Now we've got to wait for the boats to show up to bring more guys. And what's that cost? That's always a great piece of asymmetry in AmRev games.
Yeah, and it's so, for example, if you read the book Winter Soldiers about Trenton Princeton, the whole reason those famous battles occurred, arguably the Washington crossing the Delaware and all that, is because it was the end of the year, and his army was about to go home if they didn't voluntarily reenlist, and they'd had nothing but defeats, and so he was like, we got to score a win to convince these guys to sign up right past the new year. And so it's like days before they're going to go home, he does this, this kind of audacious raid. And it's just enough. It's like a moral shot in the arm, right? So that's something that, if you go back to traditional hex and counter games about the Eastern Front in World War II or something, like, how do you generate that? I mean, that starts you thinking about things like you were referring to, Alexander, temporal limits on service and the impact of morale on recruitment, that if you're in total war and everybody's in for the duration, that's not an issue, but certainly was an issue, even operationally, right? That we've got to act now because of what's going to happen to our troops in a few days.
And I like that as a game mechanic, right? Because that puts the pressure on you as a player, the same kind of pressure that someone like Washington was under, to get something done. Because I've got 2 turns left until winter, and my forces are going to kind of go, dissolve. I have to go and try to get this thing done, or hopefully I have planned well enough to be able to execute this thing. And that's a great space to play in as a player. So I think people who can design and put those in as a mechanic, usually that's a great payoff that I enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think there are also some big gaps in the time period, right? I mean, we really haven't seen a game that is very interesting about the gap between the 7 Years' War and the start of the American Revolution. And I think about it all the time, right? I mean, it's like some people think about the Roman Empire. I think about the period between the 7 Years' War and the kickoff to the American Revolution.
Like, isn't it a political game about the the discontent and in the colonies, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it would be an odd sort of thing, right? Because you've got this. I mean, one way to do it would be to try to model the British missteps and the escalation. The funny thing to me about this no taxation without representation, which we were talking about earlier before we started, is that the Patriots said it, but you could never satisfy it. If the British had said, okay, fine, they would have said, yeah, but what about, that's not enough.
Yeah.
Right. So it's almost as if it was a train nobody could stop. And the British certainly didn't do a very effective job at trying to stop it. And at some point, ended up giving the Patriots everything they wanted, but it was over. And so, it was headed for a clash. So that would be, one way to do it. But I mean, that's very one-sided. Maybe that's a solo game. The other side that's kind of interesting, I've always thought about, is what if you were an economic participant in the craziness that's going on at that time, and you had to decide, who am I going to side with and when?
Right.
And so your loyalty would reward you at the right times and then damage you at the wrong times. I think that's a tough one. I think the opening salvo at Lexington and Concord is an interesting a whole bunch of interesting stuff there, but I'm not really sure that's, is there any way to model that would be fun and interesting?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, that it's an interesting campaign, really, right? The British are going out, they're trying to find this storehouse. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. So there's kind of, the rebels are trying to use the warning to move it, to assemble resistance. And there's lots of different ways that I think could have gone, depending on intelligence, the flow of information, local morale, and other things. So you could have a kind of a hunt component to it, for example, where there's success if you surprise the colonials enough to seize their arms, perhaps. And then you've got to get your force back, right? Then the tough part comes, where you're marching back and they're sniping at you. And again, that would be, I would think you could make it either an interesting solitaire or certainly an interesting 2-player out of that as well. Very asymmetrical.
If someone had a
Revolution
mechanic.
Road from Compass Games is that very event.
Oh, okay.
So it's a CDG by John Paniski.
Oh.
Literally, you have hidden, as the Patriots, you have hidden armaments pieces that you are stowing in. It's like one of 5 different areas. Some of those areas are easier to get to for the British who are coming in.
Okay.
Some are further away. So it's a choice about where you put them, the feint, and then it's about recruiting units to come out of the taverns to take shots at the British as they're walking
it's great fun.
down the road, and then they got to make it back. And it's based on kind of a victory point accumulation of losses and whether they captured. I think they captured the Paul Revere. Paul Revere and his riders are also represented in the game. I'm not going to say it's the best game, but I do find that game very interesting.
I love John Paniski. I didn't know about this. And it's called what, Liberty Road?
Revolution Road.
Revolution Road. Cool.
Came out about 2017. Bill Morgall is the artist for the map. Alexander and I played it a couple of times. I very much enjoyed it. It needs some refinement, but it definitely is an interesting case study on that historical.
Yeah, you've never played anything quite like it because it's such a specific scenario. He's built a game for this thing, and that's pretty cool.
So if you're interested, go on our blog. I have a series of action point posts. I think I did 4 or 5 describing the different actions that each side has access to and how they're represented in history. It was very interesting.
Cool.
That's great.
Well, the other thing I've thought a lot about, that proclamation line of 1763 to me was such a keystone moment in, King George and his decisions that led to revolution. Basically, the Patriots were told, hey, you can't go to Kentucky and West where all that rich hunting ground is, and that you can't go there. And they were furious. And then they've come to find out that the British are encouraging the Native Americans to fight them and burn their houses to try to keep them from going there. To me, that would make a fascinating game of some kind.
It comes up in the Declaration of Independence, doesn't it?
And, absolutely.
Is an aspect, by the way, that I do love about Liberty or Death, is that the conflict that you just mentioned between the Patriots on the one hand and the Native Americans who would like to see that 1763 line mean something, right? That's, I think, a more important part of the revolution than we like to talk about, to be frank.
Yeah, no doubt.
Well, it's kind of forgot. I feel like, although, Harold, I think there is an event in, if I remember correctly, in Liberty or Death, but I almost feel like historians have discounted it or forgotten it and just focus on the rest of it, the taxation without representation, and which is all huge. But to me, that was the genesis for the failing of the empire and the colonists changing their mind about being a part of Britain. Hey, they don't care about us. They're inciting the natives to kill us. They can't do that. So
and I think the proof of the importance of that to the American Revolution is the Sullivan campaign in '79, where Washington he's facing the enemy, at New York. He has the enemy in front of him. He's trying to maintain this perimeter around the British. And he says, no, I'm going to take a big chunk of my army. And Sullivan, you go and destroy the Iroquois. You go destroy them. And you get, that the Battle of Newtown, which is also done in Mark Miklos' series. And successful, expedition to raise the Iroquois settlements in the war. Now, if they were just some minor irritant or a sideshow, why would Washington do that?
Yeah.
And by the way, not just do that to keep them at bay, but attempt to destroy them, literally.
Yeah. Burnt trees and crops and salted land and destroyed villages. And I think, Volko, you said in your foreword to Liberty or Death that it was the largest Patriot military action in the North that year.
I think that's in '79. I think that's right. Yeah. Well, if I wrote it, it was correct.
Well, that goes without saying.
Yeah.
I think that it's interesting, right? Because I don't think it's the context of the history we all learned in high school or elementary or whatever was in between. So it's a very common complaint about the game that why did you bring in this native faction and why are you fighting in the West? Because that's not what we learned in 8th grade. So I
think even beyond 8th grade though, right? A huge part of the identity of the United States is the Declaration of Independence. It was founded on a successful liberation action against the British. And the things that are in the zeitgeist for the past 250 years that still are, it's this, taxation without representation, freedom, democracy, all these things that are called out. But it's things like, this, the proclamation line, that was, that's almost becomes it's been settled. It's been done away with almost. The United States exists as a single country. That line, most people probably don't even know about it if you were to ask them, because it's no longer relevant to what's current, even though it probably is. But I don't think people think that it is.
And if anyone's interested in a great narrative history of the intense fighting that's going on the New York frontier during the Revolution, the book is called The Wilderness War by Alan Eckert. And Eckert did a whole series of, colonial frontier and early U.S. frontier narrative histories, but The Wilderness War is his one on the Revolution. And there's a ton of fighting going on there. So yeah, you could do absolutely, Grant, you could do a whole war game on just that. There's a lot going on.
I would also love to see someone do a treatment of the Culper spy ring with hidden traitor mechanics. And, to me, that show Turn from 15 years ago really turned me on to that part of the history. And I knew about it, but I'm not sure I gave it much credence. But I think that show really brought out those points and those characters. And I think that would make a fascinating, it would probably be more of a hidden traitor game, I'm trying to think, the Werewolf. Thing, or Werewolf, that kind of thing. But
there is a game to that effect, but there's not a lot of depth to it, right? It's the same. It's a similar experience to the most basic werewolf scenarios. Let me give you guys a quote from Declaration of Independence. So it was basically a list of grievances, right? And the 27th and final grievance against King George said, he has excited domestic insurrections against us, and he's endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. I mean, it's in the document, right?
Casus belli.
Yeah. So there it is. Yeah, it's heavy stuff. Heavy stuff.
I have always found it interesting, and obviously I'm looking at it in a 21st century mindset, but, we demonized the Native Americans. I've always, growing up in Indiana, and Indiana history being so tied to the native tribes, I've always had a great affinity for Indians and the Native Americans. And I always felt like they got a bad rap because the books I read as a child from my elementary school library really painted them as a dignified, spiritual people who were truly in connection with their land, nature, their God, their belief in a power. And I feel like we've demonized them throughout, the past 250, 300 years, and that's unfortunate. But I do like that there's a lot of games on that because it brings light to those peoples and their struggle for their freedom, for their revolution, to try to protect themselves. So anyway, I digress. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's a good note. What Volko brings up Washington's War. Maybe the game before that would be 1776, which was a very different game. But Washington's War was resilient today. It's as much fun to play now as I don't know that 1776 has survived time and modern gaming. But man, Mark's game is really solid. And I guess a part of it is it did a good job capturing the political aspect of the game, but it's just a nicely done strategic treatment.
I do remember when 1776 was promoted as the bicentennial, one of two bicentennial war games, right? The other one was Wooden Ships and Iron Men. So I'm old enough to remember that from the advertising in the stores.
Yeah, Wooden Ships is as much an American Revolution game.
True.
Scenarios.
Well, I was going to actually point it to another favorite is this one by Mike Nagel. Especially if you get the expansions, there's a ton of the Caribbean battles in the early 1780s. And the basic set has Cape Henry and Battle of the Capes in it as well. So it spans a little more than the American Revolution, but there's definitely, if you think about the British-French conflict that then moved largely into the Caribbean, then you'd call this, at least it's the same war.
Sure.
Tactical.
Who hasn't done an American Revolution game that we'd like to see do one?
Jason Matthews.
No, that's all he does is American Revolution games.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, he did Founding Fathers. It's not exactly revolution, but
Federalist stuff. Yeah.
Maybe David Thompson.
Maurice Suckling has Maurice didn't Maurice do one on Saratoga? Isn't that his?
Yes.
Freeman's Farm 1777 is his.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's a very basic war game with formations, and you kind of have only a limited amount of choices about where you can move. But I think it's a very interesting game.
Yeah, it's very well done.
Yeah, very.
I think David Thompson would be a great guy to do something on some facet of the American Revolution. Yeah. He's a good designer, I think.
I think he's a very good and prolific. But the other Jason Matthews also worked with Ananda on Imperial Struggle, right? Which covers the period of the American Revolution.
It does.
There's a hexagon somewhere for Fort Sumter or something.
Right.
So
the great thing about that game is it covers the different wars of that 100 years, including the Revolution and the 7 Years' War and whatever it is, the War of Austrian Secession, and
there's so many wars.
Yeah, there's so many going on.
That's what I love about that game is it does contextualize the American Civil War within a European context really, really well. I think it does that. Like it was big, it was important, but there's a lot of other stuff going on.
Right.
No, the French. It's better than any other game. Better than any other game, right? It really draws out that little event, that card, whatever it was, right? That is the American Revolution. I love that you call it American Civil War, Alexander. But
that's just it's late.
And it was
technically.
It was a civil war in many ways. Yeah,
not inaccurate. Frank in the comment mentioned a political game and Mark Herman or Jason Matthews. It makes me think back to your musing, Harold, about that period leading up to the American Revolution and how the British played it. And I could see a Cole Wehrle game, right, where your British power brokers in London, and instead of running India, you're trying to figure out what to do, right,
trying to
with
administer the
American colonies, right? And I don't even know who those power brokers would be exactly. It's so distant from kind of the history I learned, as like said here. But like, what does, through Cole Wehrle's perspective in history, game design philosophy, what does the American unrest look like from London? I bet he could do an awesome game on that.
It would be called John Company 2 Electric Boogaloo.
Right. Yeah.
George Company.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a book, War for America, and in fact, it's got this painting on the cover, and it's very much the, how the British are trying to, handle things, and it's this, it gives you a sense of it's geographically quite distant, right? Oh, here's one.
Last King.
Inverted, but The Last King is a great discussion of all of that. And the other interesting thing about that would be the time cycle, right? I mean, you can do all the planning you want in England, but you got to allocate resources, and then the winds start, and then you have no control for another year.
One comment I would have about the overall treatment of King George and the way they dealt with the colonies, the reality of the colonies was they were only being taxed to pay for the debt incurred to win the North American continent, right? To win the French and Indian War, so that they could live and make money there. And unfortunately, we as Americans just hate taxes. So we threw the tea in the harbor. I think it was completely justified. I just think they did a very poor job of marketing it to the people. But it really needed to be done to pay the costs of fighting that 7 years global conflict.
I mean,
but anyway, I know I sound like I'm an anti-American. I'm not, but I've always thought that was really interesting, that maybe Britain just got a bad rap.
Yeah. Another kind of aspect is, and this mainly pertains to George Washington, but I'm sure there were others as well that I'm not thinking of, where the British really did not give provincials, as they might have called it, equal respect. Yeah. Right. The idea was, if you were a citizen of Virginia or something like that, you're an Englishman. And the idea was, well, you have essentially the same rights. And that's, so the taxation, representation, all that stuff starts going. But just these officers in the French and Indian War who, they're wearing blue coats instead of red coats. And because of that, any red coat can command them. And they're very limited in how far they can rise. And so we have to wonder, for George Washington, who's a colonel of a regiment, he's fighting a brutal war on the frontier. It's really no win, and loyally defending the British crown against the French and native enemy. But he will never gain the same stature in the British army because he's a provincial. And so kind of psychologically, you got to wonder, okay, I'm going to show you,
I think that holds a lot of water broadly as well, right? If you think about so many oppressed peoples who fought for their oppressors against a common enemy, so many of those kind of situations led to independence, revolution, or reform, like across the globe and across a lot of period of time. So I think there's definitely a huge element to that of like, hey, we fought, bled, and died for you, thousands of miles away over on a small island, and now we're being treated like garbage. Like, why are we even bothering with this?
I think Machiavelli wrote in Discourses on Livy, he called it a people numerous and armed. He basically said, look, if you have a colony like that and you arm them, they will bite you.
Yeah.
Because and of course with the Romans, the colony was abused, right? It was taxed, and brutalized and forced into Roman tradition. I don't know. Volko, that's your era, not mine.
Not particularly. And some.
Well, one thing that stands out in my mind, the movie Last of the Mohicans, which is one of my favorite films of all time. Yeah. When Duncan, the British officer, it says, "Why are you treating with those colonials?"
Right.
You know, I thought we make the world England, and I love that, you know, statement. I just think it's so appropriate and really quantifies the way that they believed about the Patriots, that they were nothing more than provincial idiots who, you know, owed their existence to the crown. So anyway, great movie as well. Yeah. I mean, fantastic.
It does, you know, you're going back to the Romans, Harold, but it does seem to me that there is a natural tension there. And it's, you know, in Last of the Mohicans, in that film there, right there, they're presaging, right, the tensions that are going to eventually lead to the American Revolution, and that and some other scenes as well. And just more recently, I came across this in my work on Coast Watchers, such as an important story for Australia in World War II. And their situation where they had fought so heroically on the Western Front in France, you know, it's Australia. I think you're Australia, you're fighting in France in World War I, then in North Africa, and so many forces are drawn off to Africa and Europe that when the Japanese enter the war, Australia is like feeling totally vulnerable. And at that moment, that tension emerges because the British are saying, well, you know, we need your division still here and we need the airplanes here. And the Australians are like, hey, we're in the empire to be protected. And the enemy's on our doorstep, and you're leaving us not only without help from you, the British, but you're leaving us even without our own guys, our own wherewithal. And that was like then a tense negotiation, I guess, between the Australians and the mother country over how many military resources would go to actually defend Australia. And so I think there's so much, to me as an outsider, so much amity, you know, like friendship and alignment between Australia and the United Kingdom. But when push comes to shove, there's sort of an empire and there's the province, you know, and there's just a structural stress there always.
Yeah, and there was from the very beginning, right? We founded it as a penal colony. Like it was that Australia existed in a way that was like not a great way to start a country, by the way. And then the first major conflict that the Australian Armed Forces gets into on behalf of, you know, the empire is Gallipoli, which is a huge part of the Australian military zeitgeist. That's a lot of what their fighting national identity is built on. And we didn't do them any favors there either. And yet they still, again, there was an element of friendship there. They still provided huge amounts of manpower, material, and huge sacrifices. And then you get this situation. Like it's a long legacy of friction.
Yeah.
And I presume it's the same way in the United States, right? It's very similar, although not the whole transporting part of it.
Well, it was many people that were fleeing religious oppression to some degree too, right? I mean, there were people seeking land. There were all sorts of, I guess it was a hodgepodge of things and people that were coming to America. But
it wasn't like you stole a candlestick off to New York. That's what we did down in Sydney. That's a little different.
It makes me think about that surrender at Yorktown, right? Where it was Burgoyne, right? And Burgoyne didn't want to surrender to the
Cornwallis.
Cornwallis,
yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm glad Volko's here to save me. Cornwallis wasn't going to surrender to the Patriots. He was going to surrender to the French. So
right.
And then he sent his second out to present his sword, and Washington said, "Nope, I'm not going to come out. I'll send my second out." So, disrespect to the bitter end, even in
there you go. It's a status thing, you know.
Yep, you're not good
in
enough
European
for me to
politics.
surrender
Absolutely,
to.
it is.
Yeah. And I know Alexander pretty well. I know the way he truly feels about everyone else other than England. So I totally get it. I know why Cornwallis acted the way he acted. I'm his servant. I don't know if you know this. I'm Alexander's servant.
we established that early on, I think.
Yeah.
Well, so a couple of other interesting games on the American Revolution by interesting designers. Joe Miranda did a S&T on the American Revolution that's quite interesting and has political elements and the West Indies included in the analysis. But Richard Berg didn't do an American Revolution game, did he? And how did that not it had to be a choice, right? He did everything.
Yeah. Did he not do one?
I don't, he was so prolific. It's probably a better question for Mark. But
Mark would know.
But Mark wasn't available, so we got Volko. But we can ask him. But yeah, that would have been an interesting application, right? And some of the random events and the dice rolls would be excellent.
I think some very unique games on the American Revolutionary War is Supply Lines of the American Revolution.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
An entire novel system that focuses on an entirely, very unique part of that war that I don't think a lot of other games about the AmRev do that. And I really liked what they did with the Southern.
Same here. Yeah. The Southern strategy. Right, Supply Lines of the American Revolution, the Southern Strategy. It's terrific, yeah, and it's so focused, right? Where you basically you can't move without food, and you can't fight without
gunpowder. Yeah,
gunpowder, essentially, exactly, yeah. And it's an interesting choice because, of course, you can say that about so many different conflicts, the importance of supply and the difficulties of supply. There's so many situations, and now we have 1944 race to the Rhine. And so why would you pick, why pick the American Revolution and the North first? Because the Northern game was first.
Yeah.
Right. You can kind of see in the Carolinas campaign in 1780 and Cornwallis and all that. Okay. Yeah. He's basically going into the bad guy country, right, with his army, and he's got to supply it, and depots become important. But that was already the second volume. Yeah, it's just an interesting choice, but it's so interesting to play.
Yeah, no doubt. So, what's the future of the American Revolution game? Is there a game that we play now that's going to survive and be played in 25 years, or is it going to be a different path?
The ball system from Mark Miklos is going to have a lot of staying power, right? It's very broad. It covers a lot of battles.
I think it's going to peter out. I think it's going to peter out at about volume 43, 44, something like that. Maybe high 40s, something like that, but we'll be playing it through then. Yeah, for sure.
And I think looking to the future, what I'd like to see is, I know I'm not tooting your horn, Harold, but Campaigns of 1777 was so good because I don't think there's a lot of games at that scale. And I'd like to see more of that because that's what I enjoy in games. So I'd love to see more of that kind of, at a campaign level. It's neither like fully strategic nor is it fully tactical.
Operational.
It really feels operational. I'd like to see more of that because I think that's a really interesting space to play.
Yeah, and that's it. That one happens to be, it's how, right? Has the decision. Do I fully support the Burgoyne strategy of cutting the New England off from New York along the Hudson, or do I go gloriously off using, and is it his brother who's the naval admiral or something? I use the Navy to go down and sneak up the Chesapeake to take Philadelphia from behind, and he does the latter, and it contributes to the disaster at Saratoga, which then contributes to France coming in, which contributes to losing, right? So you have that whole chain. So what would be another campaign in the American Revolution that would have that kind of, that's a really rich operational decision space, right? For the British in that game. Like what would be another one? Maybe the Southern Campaign.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot that it's interesting that happened in and around South Carolina, as you and I have talked about Volko in the past. So, that would be an interesting series. The army, the British Army, was relatively small in the South.
Yeah.
At that point, it was elite, but it was relatively small compared to what Howe had earlier in the war. So, we have 3 Alexanders. So I'm going to add one of them. Let's see what happens here.
3 Grants.
I'm back. I'm back. I'm sorry. I apologize. I lost audio for some reason.
This idea of having another operational game just gives me, and then we were talking about like recruitment and time limited service on the Patriot side. So now you could have levy and campaign the American Revolution, right? And you could do a series of volumes. I think that might work.
That'd be amazing.
You've got the you could set, well, if we win this battle, we get these guys to sign on for a not longer period, and if we lose this battle, they're going home.
The best part of that, Volko, would be it would introduce the term provender into the Revolution games.
Well, there you go. And you've already got that basis and supply lines of the American Revolution, to build on. So you'd put all of that together into instead of 1777, it'd be 1780. That'd be awesome. That'd be a great game. I'd play that game.
Absolutely. Well, it was great having you guys on and talking. We went live. We didn't tell anybody we're going to go live. I can see how many people are watching us at any point in time. Right now, there are 3 people watching us. So
welcome.
There are more people on the show that are watching us right now. But I think the idea was, let's get together and talk about this, because you guys have done this before, right? You've done your own games of the American Revolution and ranked them. And so it was obvious. And then Volko, of course, is an encyclopedia of knowledge of everything. So great to have you on as well, Volko. We have this American Revolution online convention coming up June 27, 2026, for the future people who want to watch this. And I will put the link to that. It's $10 and you got all day, and Volko's kicking it off with Coffee with Volko. It's usually Coffee with the Players Aid guys, but they're out of town. So Volko's going to run Coffee that morning. Let's see how it goes. Let's see how he makes coffee, talks about coffee, engages the audience. And then, Mark Miklos is there, and Mark Herman, and Jason Matthews is going to talk about Imperial Struggle with Ananda, and then also about Founding Fathers. And there's just a lot going on. And it's a lot of American Revolution discussions, and to celebrate 250 years of independence. So thanks again, gentlemen, for joining me, and let's do this again soon. It was fun.
Absolutely, it was a pleasure.
Great going with you guys.
Thank you.